KHTS. Today we are talking about raising emotionally intelligent kids. That was a mouthful, but before I can even wrap my mind around that, what does that even mean?
Well, first of all, I think a lot of the times as parents, we get really fixated on making sure that our kids, go to school and study and become very smart, become intellectual. And I feel like, back in the 60s, 70s, if you were highly intelligent, you just seem to rise above everyone else when it comes to knowledge. But because of today's world and the advanced technologies that we live in, information is at your fingertips and you can educate yourself pretty quick and you can get information really fast. So, and it's kind of my motto when I talk to kids, especially in the teen trainings. I tell them that being smart, being intelligent isn't good enough in today's world anymore when you want to be successful in all areas of your life. Because let's face it, you can be successful when it comes to having a lot of information and knowing how to figure things out and being a math wizard and, doing all that kind of stuff for certain specific lines of work. But in order to be happy and fulfilled and to be able to create powerful relationships, deep and meaningful, and you have to have some emotional intelligence too. You got to balance that out. And I think that when you really break down emotional intelligence, it boils down to the capacity to be aware and in control of our own expressions, our own emotions, and to be able to handle the interpersonal relationships that allows us to be empathetic with other people as well. So it's something that you have to work on. You got to be conscious and aware, and you got to develop yourself from within.
So how I guess maybe what are some tips and how do you even instill that type of emotional intelligence?
I think the first thing that you have to do when you're working with your kids is you have to be conscious and aware yourself to be able to teach your kids how to work through and acknowledge their own emotions, which would also mean that you as a parent have to also be practicing, acknowledging and noticing your own emotions and not being in denial of them. When you hear me say, don't be in denial of your emotions as an adult, what do you think of?
I kind of think of men who are taught not to cry, so they are in denial that they're upset about something.
Yeah, you would have to really be honest about what you're feeling, and you have to learn how to do that. And you have to learn how to practice checking in with yourself and acknowledging that right now I am afraid. And so me being upset and yelling at the kids or taking my anger out on my wife or whatever it is, I have to really sit down and be conscious and aware of what's the emotion that's coming up for me. And if I can be honest enough to just stop and ask for forgiveness or ask, or apologize to the people that I'm hurting and just be honest with the fact that what's really going on is I'm feeling afraid. And I think that most people, when we're unconscious, we don't operate like that. We don't get honest with what we're really feeling because we weren't taught how to check in and acknowledge what we're feeling.
I was just going to say, can we kind of go over an example of checking in with yourself? Because I didn't really start, and I grew up like this, so I've been taught the term checking in with yourself, but just recently, the last year or so, I started kind of telling on myself and in my quote unquote check-ins. And I wasn't really sure what a check-in really was. I just kind of thought I was doing it because I was I would hear myself talking to myself in my head. But really when I started actually checking in with myself, it was a lot of me telling myself, actually you're upset about this, so stop pretending you're not. Or maybe you're being a brat right now and you have an attitude. So I didn't really start checking in with myself and being honest until recently.
Yeah. When you talk about, and we use the term checking in with yourself, the way I describe it is it's like a conversation that you're having with yourself. It's like a self-talk. We always have this little voice that's talking to us, but it's talking to us either consciously or unconsciously. And if that voice is unchecked, it's unconsciously talking to us and kind of having us react in situations that we're not really mindful of what we're doing and what we're saying. We're just kind of on automatic pilot. Something happens and then boom, we react. And we're not really present in the moment, realizing why I'm choosing this and where am I choosing from. So the self-talk is about asking yourself, okay, Alex, relax, take a deep breath, and then very quickly, because I practiced for many years, I kind of go down this checklist. and it's really fast. It's probably now it's like an instinct. But when I first started kind of being more mindful of myself, I have to go down. I would literally have to take a deep breath, and I would ask people, give me a minute, or give me a few minutes or a few seconds to figure this out. And I would just go down a process through the self-talk of asking myself, what does this really mean? What's the best way to respond? What's the outcome you're looking for? If, what you're choosing right now, is this going to be beneficial or is this going to be hurtful? So it's kind of like this self-talk that you got to do to really be mindful of what's going on with you. And that's the emotional intelligence that we're talking about, is being present and being aware.
Yeah. And I think we're constantly checking in with ourselves and we just don't really know it. Or at least for me, it's not like I've never checked in with myself before. I think just recently I've been consciously paying attention to what both sides are saying instead of unconsciously just naturally choosing one.
Yeah. And so what I did was I kind of just went online and looked at a few different blogs, because you got professionals out there that make this their career about really teaching emotional intelligence. And I grabbed a few key nuggets that I'd love to talk about. One of the tips is to acknowledge your child's perspectives and empathize with them. So I think the first step is that you want to first acknowledge that whatever your son or daughter is feeling, because this is all about feeling, it's feeling based. Whatever they're feeling, allow that to be okay. So sometimes when they get mad or angry about something, instead of punishing them for being mad or angry or throwing a temper tantrum, because that's a lot of us parents, what we want to do is we're trying to control the situation, right? We're out shopping at the mall or something like that, and our son or daughter doesn't get what they want and they're throwing a temper tantrum. It's because they're feeling a certain way. And we don't want to be embarrassed, or we don't want to look like we don't have our kid in check, or that, we're not in control of the situation. So what happens is a lot of times as parents, we react and we go into the trying to stuff it or shut it down or course correct it in that moment. And what we do is we kind of shut down the machine of our sons or daughters from allowing them to kind of have their own feelings and letting it run its course. One of the biggest things I learned about raising emotional intelligent kids is that you have to create a safe space for them to have those emotions come up, because they're coming up naturally, and letting them run their course without you getting in the way and making them bad and wrong because they're having those feelings. You can talk about it later on, but in the moment, you have to learn how to create this safe space to let the feelings come up. Now, hopefully you're doing this work at home so that when you get to the mall, you're not right there in the moment trying to deal with them. But I'm trying to paint this picture for you so that when your sons or daughters are upset and they are angry and they are acting out unconsciously, your job is to let them have that space to flush out that emotion. And then when it dies down, now you want to start having a conversation about it and asking them questions about how they feel and why they feel like that.
Yeah, I actually really like this one, because one of the things that I experienced as a kid, teen, and now a young adult is really needing my emotions to feel validated, not just by my friends or my family, but mostly by my parents. Because I especially remember being a teen, and if I was upset about something and I got yelled at, that made it worse, instead of being told, hey, it's okay. You can't act like this. We'll handle it later. There were certain things that I think that you're talking about in the picture that you're painting, I can see having value in, back then. But even now, I still have that little part of me that if I'm upset about something, I want someone to say, oh, it's okay to be upset about this.
And as you're honestly sharing, there's a part of me that I want to honestly tell on myself and look back at the younger unconscious version of myself, where I was, as a parent, not patient enough and present enough or aware enough to recognize that you do need to be validated for having whatever feelings are coming up. And probably looking back, some of the things that unconsciously said to you that would have shut that down for you would have been things like, what are you crying about? What are you crying for? Just something like being insensitive to something that you're feeling that I'm not. Just in that statement, like, what are you crying about? That can send the statement to you that it's not okay to cry, which will force you to and shut the machine down. And then I'm going to be later on in my 30s and 40s visiting you in your home with your husband, and you don't have no emotions. You're like a robot. And then that would break my heart. I'd be sitting there, heartbroken, because I'd have to look back at my parenting and say to myself, where did I play the part where I shut down the emotions of my son or my daughters because I didn't create a safe space for them to feel whatever was feeling naturally and organically?
Yeah, and I think especially as a young kid, when you are throwing a temper tantrum at the mall and your mom tells you to be quiet, or she grabs you by your arm, or my favorite was my mom would pinch me, but because it was settled. But when you're having those emotions and you're getting in trouble for having them, you're being told that they're bad. Or at least I remember, if I was feeling choked up and I was about to cry, I remember everybody always tell me, "Are you about to cry?" when I was a kid, and I'd be like, no, and go in my room, and that would make me even more upset.
Yeah, and I don't think it was that they were directly trying to make you not cry or feeling your emotions. It was unconsciously and indirectly they were, putting their words in a certain way that would have you look at yourself and tell yourself or come to the conclusion that it's not okay to cry, or it's not okay to feel my feelings wherever and whenever I want. And that could be environmental. We grow up in homes where, like you were talking about earlier, we got the macho dads, or we have the moms that, just are very poised and very, got their walls up and they don't show their emotions very well. If you grow up in that kind of environment, that's kind of how you're going to design yourself. Your emotional chart is going to be designed based on the environment that you live in. When I was growing up, I used to always hear from my dad some version of, well, if you're going to cry, I'll give you something to cry about, and that, again, that made you feel like, well, then I guess I'm not going to cry. So you just shut down the machine. And I think maybe that could be cultural too, right? There's some cultures that you just either, aren't feeling freed up to be able to express your emotions. And I think that that's key for our kids is to have parents that don't, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, create an environment where it's not okay to feel your emotions. And that really takes a really high level of awareness as a parent to know this is the kind of environment that I want to set up for my kids so they can develop an emotional state, in a very healthy emotional state.
Yeah. And what are those tips that you could give to parents that would let them allow their kids, or, when their kids are throwing that temper tantrum, what can they do? Or even teens. I think teens, especially when they're going through their drama and their little emotions and puberty and everything, what can you say in those situations?
Well, I think there's two things. One is that as a parent, you have to be willing to go through your own emotional development process on your own, as well as be an open book and allow your kids to see you have the courage to express your own emotions as they come up. And that takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot for you to challenge your ego and tell your ego to take a back seat, that you're going to let your spirit come out and be authentic and be vulnerable. And you got to allow that process to come up whenever it's happening organically. And then you got to, and it might shock your kids. It might shock your husband or your wife for you to kind of allow yourself to go through that process. And when it's happening, you got to be truthful and you got to share and you got to ask your kids and your family to be sensitive about it, to kind of ask them permission to take your heart and really take care of it when you're vulnerable like that. And so it takes a little bit of a mindfulness for you to kind of be the example. And then from that place, you can now teach your kids how to recognize their own emotions. You can sit down and have them acknowledge and recognize some of their own feelings and whatever's coming up for them. And I think that 2-part process is going to be powerful for the family.
Yeah. And one of the things I was thinking about a little bit earlier was, I think it's easy to get offended, at least for me, it's easy to get offended when I'm feeling something and one, someone's not validating it, but two, they're putting it down. And I know that I'm guilty of doing that too. Sometimes something's a big deal for my mom and I say, whoa, calm down. It's not a big deal. And to her, and sometimes that'll just trigger her to be like, it is a big deal because, and I do the same thing, but I see myself doing those things to people that so it's not just about the parents doing it to the kids, because now that I'm older, I do that to my mom, my sister, my brother. We do that to our parents. And, a little part of it is maybe not taking offense because we don't know what you're going through. So I could see how, the kids should be kind of seeing that too.
And what I hear when you say that, what I'm hearing is it's almost like you're downplaying their emotion. It's not that you're discrediting it. You're just downplaying it when you're saying, hey, it's not that big of a deal. Relax. Don't be so dramatic. We use these terms and we don't realize that the way that the other person, as they're in that emotional state, what they're hearing is that it's not okay to feel what I'm feeling. And so by us even, saying that, we don't realize that we're downplaying their emotions instead of, being silent and allowing them to just flush it up however it looks for them. Kind of like looking at it as a gift. Like, I'm going to sit here with a smile on my face while you're being dramatic and you're getting out whatever frustrations you got or whatever is coming up for you. Just a big smile on my face and realize that it's not personal. That's the biggest key, especially for parents, is don't take the emotional outbursts from your kids and the way that they're choosing to let it go. Don't take it personal. It's got nothing to do with you. It might have to do with something that you said or rules that you gave them or something that you're trying to enforce. They're having kind of their own emotional breakdown about what the topic is, but it's not about you specifically. It's how they're handling it. It's how they're dealing with it. They can't cope. So you have to not take it personal, allow them to have that freedom to create that emotional outburst like that.
Yeah. And sometimes I think that, I don't know why, but I guess when, let's say, for example, the one I was using, if my mom comes in and she's all upset about something, I don't know why I let it affect me. Like what I'm doing, her stress is like coming onto me when it's really not. So, another thing is, I think sometimes I'm very quick to say, hey, that's not a big deal, because I think I have my stuff going on. I'm like, your thing's so small.
Right.
But even though that's not true, because her thing's just as big as my things or whatever. So everyone's thing looks different.
And even as a parent, you got to realize that your 6-year-old or your 9-year-old, whatever it is that's a big deal for them that they're emotionally going through, to your 45-year experience or your 32-year experience, you're trying to match that to a 6-year-old experience or an 8-year-old experience. So whatever's a big deal to them in your scale, it's not a big deal. It's like it's so small to you, but to them it's at a 9. From a 0 to 10, you got 9s and 10s. It's their 9 and 10, but to you it's your 1. So you can't downplay whatever it is that it's a big deal to them. You gotta kind of meet them where they are and see how they see it and see how they feel it and how they're dealing with it, and be compassionate in those moments. And when you're being compassionate, you're sending the message to them that it's okay to feel how you're feeling. And then after all the feelings are felt and then they kind of start to calm down, that's where we start to kind of walk them through the process of acknowledging and recognizing how they feel, why they felt like that. Then if you want to do some coaching or mentoring or course correcting, that's the time to do it. After you've created the safe space where they go elevate and then they come down. And then after you've asked the questions, then you can start doing the feel, felt, found. Hey, I know how you feel. I feel the same way sometimes with your mom or your dad. And what I found out is, and then that's where you drop your advice. What I've learned was when I start to master my own emotions, when I start to calm myself down, then you can give the advice. But there's a process to it. And I think a lot of us, when we're unconscious, we just go into resistance to it right away and we try to shut it down, and we don't create that space for them to kind of flush up and let out whatever's they're feeling naturally.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, was that whole process. So when your kid, and I'm going to use a teenager, for example, when your teenager's going through something emotional, that's a big deal for them. They don't have a date to the dance, and you think, oh, okay, that's not that big of a deal. You'll live. There's more dances. You're 13. To them, they're like, no,
you don't understand. That's good to the.
So at what point?
Or you never listened to me.
Yeah. So what does that process look like? What I understand the feel, felt, found part, but what's before that? What's in between them feeling like the world is going to end and you coming in to save them?
The kind of coaching I give and the mentoring I give on and advice I give to that when parents ask me stuff like that is I tell them, don't say anything. Just be a committed listener. When your son or daughter is coming to you and they're kind of, they're emotionally charged about something and they're kind of venting and they're like, and they're all riled up, just put a big smile on your face. Tell yourself that you don't have to say anything to them or give them advice, or you don't have to fix their problem. Just be a committed listener. Listen from an open, loving, compassionate place. And what you'll notice is when you don't have to say anything, and they're like getting it out, I want you to visualize like they've got so much bottled up that when they're looking for you to be an outlet or like a bucket, be a bucket so they can just spill everything into the bucket. And when they're done, get the bucket, put it aside, and maybe you don't have to say anything even after that. Maybe you just grab their hand or you give them a hug. There's so many powerful things that can come out of you just being silent, or you not thinking that you have to fix something or course correct it or give advice. Some of the best parenting comes from not saying anything, just being that loving, compassionate ear for somebody is, I think, 1,000 times greater when it comes to teaching than you thinking you have to have all the right answers to fix your kids' problems. I don't know if that makes sense to you or that helps you kind of wrap your mind around what's a better way to support them when they're going through that.
Yeah, I find that sometimes, at least with my friends, if I'm venting, if you're saying too much, I'm not listening. So sometimes it's just being there and being a shoulder to cry on.
Absolutely.
Stay tuned for more. We have to go on a quick break. We'll be right back. You're listening to My Conscious Dad right here on your hometown station, AM 1220 KHTS.